Well, questions being asked about whether there's a legal case against Israel over its raid on the Gaza flotilla. Let's talk to Douglas Guilfoyle, maritime legal expert at the University College of London and the author of Shipping Interdiction and the Law of the Sea. Joins us live from Dublin. Mr. Guilfoyle, good to have you on this news hour. A lot of people have been talking about whether Israel had any right to do this. Did it?
Whether Israel had a right to intercept the ship on the high seas depends on whether it was engaged in a legal blockade. A blockade is a recognised tool of warfare that could allow the stopping and search of a ship on the high seas, but it has a number of requirements. There needs to be an armed conflict, the limits of the blockade need to be defined and properly publicised, and most importantly, a blockade should not proceed if it violates the principle of proportionality, if it inflicts excessive damage on the civilian population in relation to the concrete military advantage expected. Now, if those requirements were met, then yes, a ship could have been intercepted on the high seas if there was a suspicion it was going to attempt to breach the blockade.
So who decides if a blockade is legal, if that's what it all comes down to? It would appear to be an entirely subjective decision. You can decide what you want.
Well, each state's going to take its own view of whether it's met the requirements of international law, but a good, I suppose, metric is whether it's been accepted by other states, and there's certainly been a lot of condemnation of this blockade.
Where does that leave the international community if it wants to pursue any action against Israel legally?
Well, the principal options would lie, I think, with the United Nations and condemnation in the Security Council and action by other UN organs. I note that the Secretary-General has already called this morning, I believe, for a cessation of the blockade, referring to it as counterproductive and wrong.
It all depends, I suppose, to what extent Israel's prepared to cooperate, and we haven't seen a great deal of that when it comes to investigations in the past. But if another country wanted to launch its own investigation, perhaps the United Nations, perhaps Turkey, perhaps Ireland, because some of its citizens were on board, would it have any means by which to subpoena anybody in Israel, to force them to hand over what it considers to be crucial evidence or statements?
Well, it could certainly attempt to do so. I mean, that's going to turn on the national criminal law of the investigating state or the investigating body. Compelling evidence from another state is difficult. It relies on international cooperation and may run into issues of state immunity or state secrecy when you're trying to get information out of a government. Again, if there's a UN investigation, in theory, the Security Council could call upon Israel to cooperate fully, and under the UN Charter, Israel would be obliged to cooperate with that decision.
When it comes to establishing this blockade, let's go back a step on this one. You said a nation had to make announcements, it had to inform the international community that this is what was happening, that it was at war, etc., etc. From what you've been able to learn, did any of that happen as far as Israel was concerned?
It's difficult and something that I think commentators and international lawyers are going to need to look at closely, whether there was proper notification of this blockade. It's been going on for a number of years, and normally if there had been notification to what are called neutral powers, you'd expect it to show up in things like instructions to the merchant fleet of potentially affected flag states. I haven't seen any of that. It doesn't mean it's not there. It requires further investigation. The real issue to my mind, though, is the question of damage to the civilian population. If you have UN agencies saying that insufficient aid is getting through to Gaza, and I've seen one BBC report saying that some UN agencies have called what's getting through less than a quarter of what they need on a daily basis, that alone, to my mind, raises serious concerns about the legality of a blockade, even if the formal requirements have been complied with.
Mr. Guilfoyle, where do you see this going now? I mean, is there any point in anybody pursuing this legally, given the fact that as many of us know, Israel has ignored countless UN resolutions during the course of the last 30, 40 years.
It's a difficult question. I think what, as it were, speaking law does in this situation is it forms a channel through which political pressure is applied. And certainly there seems to be an awful lot more pressure arising out of this incident, both in the international community and, it would seem, within Israeli politics itself. So maybe this is an occasion where we might see some kind of breakthrough, or at least a lessening of the blockade that's in place.
Very interesting. Douglas Guilfoyle, thanks very much indeed for your thoughts on that.